Micki Glenn is as delighted as anyone to see a perfect rainbow over the water. But unlike most of us, she is just as delighted to see sharks under the waves.
They're powerful and graceful. I mean, they're beautiful, beautiful animals.
Which is why Glenn and her husband, both expert divers, went on a Caribbean scuba expedition 11 years ago, photographing sharks.
And they would just slowly cruise around. It was almost like watching horses.
And some were almost as big. On day 5, this 7-foot female got uncomfortably close.
Her eye was just maybe 8 inches from my eye, and she just hung there vertically in the water.
Then she struck.
And she had my whole right upper body in her mouth. So when she whipped back and forth, my forehead would slam the water, and then the back of my head would slam the water.
When the shark suddenly let go, she took a chunk of Glenn's arm and shoulder with her.
I could see blood everywhere.
It's unbelievable that you survived.
It is, it really is. I mean, that's a miracle in itself.
Second miracle, 6 surgeries, and a few weeks later, she was back at work. She had no use of her right hand, was haunted by flashbacks, but determined to resume normal life on the farm, and yes, even back in the water.
Do you consider yourself extraordinarily resilient?
I do now. I'm proud of the way that I handle things.
Most of us come nose to nose with sharks only in the safety of an aquarium, which is probably a good thing. But bad things happen on dry land as well, and people bounce back from trauma all the time, which raises that age-old question, what about me? Faced with a real crisis, how resilient would I be?
You can train yourself to be more resilient.
Okay. What do I do?
We and others.
20 years ago, psychiatrist Dennis Charney, now dean of Mount Sinai Medical School in New York City, was studying soldiers and post-traumatic stress, and he became fascinated with the resilience of those who didn't have it.
We came up with a series of factors that seem to be prevalent in all different populations of people and all different kinds of trauma.
He says that in disasters like 9/11 or Hurricane Sandy, people are more likely to weather the storm when they have strong social support, a strong community. And if there isn't one, real survivors will make their own. Especially true, he found, among former POWs.
Many of them were in solitary confinement for years, and they weren't allowed to talk. So they developed a way of communicating by tapping on the wall. And the analogy is that everybody needs a tap code, a way of developing a support system and communicating with other people that are going to help them get through tough times.
Even in the toughest times, Charney's resilient POWs shared something else, unshakable optimism.
One of the POWs told us that, we knew we were 8,000 miles away. We knew that nobody was going to come and get us, and we were being held by an enemy. But together, we felt we were going to prevail.
I've been here since 1985.
Micki Glenn certainly can relate to that.
If somebody says to you, well, good Lord, Micki, how did you come back from this? What do you tell them?
I just stumbled on positivity and how powerful it is. That's a big part of it.
How would you characterize the role of optimism in your ability to persevere?
It was the most important aspect of my survival.
Like Micki Glenn, Regina Calcaterra beat long odds by staying hopeful. But unlike Glenn, her trauma was decades long.
My mother was mentally ill, and she self-medicated with drugs and alcohol, and she ended up having 5 children with 5 different men.
But she focused her rage on her middle child, something you'd hardly guess from Regina's brave little smile in one of her few childhood photos.
She would pick up my body and throw it into a wall. She would lift up the back of my hair and then bang my head into the ground. And while I was down as this child, she'd be kicking me in the ribs and kicking me in the back.
School was a safe haven, but as Calcaterra writes in her recent memoir, she often was homeless and couldn't go.
How did you survive? How did you feed yourselves?
We stole food to eat. I was drinking vinegar to survive because
You're drinking vinegar?
I figured out that it just suppressed my appetite and I would be less hungry with it.
By 8, she realized her situation was neither her fault nor hopeless. By 14, she had won legal emancipation from her mother. She went on to college, then law school. Today, she is a top aide to the governor of New York.
Do you consider yourself a resilient person?
Yes. If I'm pinged or knocked down, I get up very quickly and just move forward. And I always have.
Do you think you're unusual?
Do you think I'm unusual?
Not at all, probably would be George Bonanno's answer to that. A professor of psychology at Columbia University's Teachers College, he says his studies show people are a lot more resilient than they think.
We just did a study on spinal cord injury, and resilience was over 50%.
That's right, more than half the people he interviewed in the hospital showed no signs of depression or anxiety. Another study of trauma centers had equally impressive results.
People who were minding their own business suddenly were injured in a single incident trauma, bells and whistles and ambulances, and required emergency surgery. It's very scary stuff.
And the resilient people would have been more than half of the people?
They were about 60% in that study, yeah.
My favorite fish.
All these years later, Micki Glenn and Regina Calcaterra look back at their experiences almost philosophically.
Do you get annoyed at people when they get all upset about life's little issues?
Absolutely. I do. I do. And I actually think that it's good that they get upset about the small things because then they didn't experience such pain and suffering.
If you could magically erase this whole thing from your life, would you do it?
No. I learned so much through it. I learned that you are who you are on the inside, and it doesn't matter how scarred you are on the outside. I mean, those are life lessons that most people don't get to learn.